Hello everybody, thank you very much for coming. It's a real pleasure to introduce Professor Johannes Birringer. Johannes, I never know if I pronounce your name correctly. Is it Birringer? Yeah, yeah. No, it is, okay. That's good. That's a good start. So, Professor Birringer is based at Brunel University, West London, and where he's chair in drama and performance technologies. And he's also the artistic director of the new Centre for Contemporary Performance at Brunel. Professor Birringer has been in the UK the last few years before he was in the States, where for many years he's been the artistic director of the Alienation Multimedia Ensemble. So he's a dancer, choreographer, as well as a very well-known theorist. We've got all his books in the library, so if you're inspired, please go and have a look afterwards if you haven't already done so. Some of the books are the most recent one, Performance, Technology and Science, that came out in 2008. Performance on the Edge, Transformations of Culture in 2000 and 2005. Media and Performance Along the Border in 1998, and Theatre Theory Postmodernism in 91. Other than that, Professor Birringer is a contributing editor with numerous journals, such as the Performing Arts Journal, the Performance Research, South African Theatre Journal, and the Body Space and Technology Journal. So today, Johannes will be speaking about open score performance media networks. And he will later be doing a workshop. I know some of you will be taking part in the workshop from 6 to 9. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria. And thank you very much for bringing me here. I'm looking forward to this occasion of sharing some thoughts with you, and then the workshop afterwards will be also exciting. I have not ever been here before, so we are sharing quite a few hours together. Also, we are on camera, and that is not only to document, but we're hoping to actually broadcast the lecture to the dancetechTV community, meaning the presentation will go online and then will be available to anyone out there in the world who wants to have a look at the presentation. So thanks to our collaborators in New York, and thank you, Maria, for allowing that, and I'll get started. Probably 45 minutes and then a discussion with you. It's not a strictly written presentation in the sense that I want to focus a lot on theoretical ideas that I will have to really develop, I guess, through writing. I'm trying to do it speaking off the cuff, yeah? So I hope you are okay with that. And I'm mixing my thoughts or these proposals with a lot of imagery to make it more lively and perhaps also more enjoyable. And so I would like to start with a prologue, film.
I'm Jen Preston. I'm Alice Preston.
I'm dancetechTV.
I am Carol Ruiz.
I'm Solomon. I am Dave Saccharin.
I am Aviva Stone.
I'm Lars Lorisch.
I am Yossi Baskin.
My name is Norvi Bullock. I'm Eliza Dan.
I am Cosmos Robert Savage.
I am Lou Hall.
I am Walter Siegel.
I am Charles Hall.
I am Barbara Wald.
I am Gail Rockford. I'm Jen Preston. I'm Alice Preston. I'm Christine Wheeler.
I'm dancetechTV.
I am Carol Ruiz.
I'm Solomon. I am Dave Saccharin.
I am Aviva Stone.
I'm Lars Lorisch.
I am Yossi Baskin.
As you see, the footage is quite grainy, and the material is historical material from the 1960s, and I will come back to it in a moment. The structure today will be 4 sections, and I will briefly refer to my last book as sort of given me the ground on which I'm currently working, both in my practical work and in my writing. And the center of this last book was an attempt to address the question of interactivity, and even perhaps to promote it as a possible paradigm for the work that we are now engaging in the digital arts, in the digital media arts, as well as in performance. So I will address this notion of interactivity and at the same time raise questions about it. My strong interest right now is in thinking about our spaces of work as environments, and also the relationship of these spaces to the world, to the environments beyond the theater. And therefore I'd like to end with perhaps asking you what your opinions are about the social dimension of the kind of media work that we're doing, and whether the notion of interactivity can perhaps be expanded in a sense of the social. If we had more time, we would also have to raise economic and political issues, namely addressing the conditions under which we are able to work or imagine producing work under conditions of production. So my book tries to link the arts with our partners in science, and the thinking that's happening now in the crossovers between the arts and performance and science, and of course the link, or often the linking toolkit is our technological instrumentarium, and so that sort of sits in the middle. And as I said earlier, I was much more enthusiastic about placing interactivity as a crucial philosophy or paradigm into the center, and now I'm becoming more and more disillusioned by it, partly from the point of view of being a theater dance person. I'm beginning to find less and less use for it. At least I'm discovering more and more problems with it, and I would be interested in hearing whether you have discovered problems, or whether you are actually producing interactive work, or whether you are comfortable moving in that direction. So now the work that I'm currently able to do is not so much in the industrial professional sector, but I'm mostly working with a lab team at my university. My small ensemble in Houston, I only see them once a year, and therefore the work we are now doing is in Britain, I think, considered part of research. And the laboratory that I direct is called Design and Performance Lab. And in this lab, I have younger people working with me who are very much encouraging me to believe in all the things that they are discovering. So I'm going to show you a brief excerpt from Doros Polidorus' current work for us. And he's interested in games. And he says, Johannes, don't worry, very soon the dancers will be using the point of view of the camera of the games that I'm hacking into, so that you will be able to have your dancers move through the labyrinths of whatever the imaginary worlds that we're creating. I thought this is interesting because 10, 20 years ago, a lot of our projections were, of course, slides and video, and that tends to be rather more static. So the idea of moving through images is attractive to me, and I'm waiting for the games unit in our lab to hack. And of course, as I now have these conversations with people interested in the games culture, and people urging me to do my performances in Second Life, why bother with the real space? So I am looking at what they're doing in the virtual worlds, and how certain notions of action or character or notions of the avatar come back to us in the performing arts field. This is a slide from a company in London called Igloo, who I think are one of the first groups that actually are presenting work that is 3D computer-generated graphic interactive installation work with characters who are dancers, but the spaces are 3D spaces that they have created. And their piece now that was, I think, shown since last year is called Swanquake, just as an example. But before we go into this world of performance and digital media, I'd like to take us on to a slightly different journey and looking at sound. Yeah? So this is, for me, in terms of looking at the history of our current practice and where we take inspiration. Of course, sound art is an important dimension. And this particular piece intrigued me because it involves the movement through an environment that then lets you experience the sound. Now, the work is shown in two ways, and that's an interesting, again, predicament. You show it in a gallery to a certain extent, and what they did is they exhibited it in Boston, in the ICA, and so there is this vista to the harbor. It's a new building, beautiful building, and if you are in the museum, you hear the sound. But the idea, of course, is to go onto the island where the sound was sampled and created. And so if you're going onto the sound journey, you are equipped with the headphones and you go to Spectacle Island. And what I find very powerful here is that the artist Terry Rupp was thinking about the cultural, geological, acoustic, geographic, political layers of this island, and in a sense digging into it to create this sound score that you are now experiencing as you walk into the island. So you may have experienced sound art of this nature. I think there are some practitioners who do this, and also using the new GPS technology to bring you into this sound environment. Of course, I asked myself, being interested in such perhaps complexity of layers of historical sedimentation, cultural sedimentation, the various uses that this island was undergoing. And you may have also heard of, there's a small island outside of Manhattan, which at one point was used as a dump, and then later on I think it actually, it's called Fresh Kills. They sent some of the remains of the World Trade Center out there to be buried, so to speak, in a dump. And it's interesting to see what our islands are used for. And if you're dealing with this kind of content, it's interesting to ask, how can sound or how can music convey this content? And we can maybe talk about that later on. So now I go back. 1960s, for me, exploring interactivity and trying to learn from the history, I wanted to go back and look at something that really inspired me. And I came across this event in 1966 called 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering. This is from the cover of the program. They overlaid all the electronic circuit patches that the engineers had, and created this as their cover of the event, which was a series of performances. Each was shown twice over 10 days in the Armory building, and spearheaded and led by this relationship, partnership, yeah, between artists and engineers, and the leading persons were Bob Rauschenberg and Billy Klüver. So for me, Rauschenberg's piece, which I used as the title for today, Open Score, is a tremendous example of an early work of interactive performance. And this morning I thought, open score. Now, how would I translate this to myself, the term score? Like in German, probably it refers to Partitur, the musical term, which I think we also use in English, except score, I think, also refers to games, yeah? And the score of a game. And it also rings a bit like open source to me, and therefore I was sort of thinking back to the time when John Cage was working with Rauschenberg, and when Cage was developing ideas about indeterminacy, and also the way Cage was writing his scores. If you have seen them, they're very beautiful, yeah, and they are sort of maybe an unusual way for an instrumentalist to give you certain possibilities of interpreting that score, yeah. And looking at some of the slides, it's amazing to see the amount of stuff they had there, yeah, the gear, yeah, back then, 60s, yeah, electroacoustic, early electronic gears, all the cables, the patch boxes, the circuits that had to be set up. So you see the engineers on one side, and on the other side you see Alex Hay in a piece with Rauschenberg as a sort of a supporting performer. He's picking up all these felt pieces. And Hay in '66 already interested in interface, yeah, techniques. He's wearing a bioradio. He's having a closed circuit camera on his face, and he's taking, you see on the right-hand side, all the batteries and the transmitters. He's taking the signals from the heartbeat and the pulse and sending them out to be heard. And I guess the musicians were, you know, hooking them up. Please, there's more chairs. Come in if you want to. Hooking them up, and he is already doing the kind of electroacoustic and later, you know, digital interface stuff that you now see Stellark and other artists doing when they are connected to the network, yeah? And then on the other side you see a wide-angle view of Rauschenberg's open score, which I will show you in a second. Herb Schneider did all the diagrams, and I think, again, this is now becoming available, this material. The first exhibitions are beginning to be created. There was one in Boston 2 years ago, which tried to at least recreate the traces, the objects that are left over from that concert. And I'm very happy to present you with the original performance because it's just become available, yeah? So let's listen for a moment then to the voice of the engineer, yeah? I think it's very beautiful to hear the original, yeah, makers talk about it.
January 1960, 10 artists from New York and 30 engineers from Telephone Laboratories began collaboration and resulted in a series of dance, music, and theater. They all incorporated the new technology. 9 musicians and engineers took place in October 1966 at the 69th Street Armory in New York. The performances were recorded and filmed both in color and in black and white. While this material can not represent the artist's work in full, it has now been assembled by Barrios in 10 videos that document each artist's work. Studio consists of engineers and our many friends, but above all, it was Roger's commitment to collaboration that provided the spirit and the energy that made it all happen.
Slightly less damp, a little bit of light. I'm speaking over the film now. If you don't know the performance, it's very clear. That echo is not on the original film, it's in your house somewhere. Spook, yeah? He set up a tennis court as the stage. He invited 2 tennis players, one professional, one artist. He had 3 screens hanging somewhere on the ceiling, which you already saw in the beginning. And then he had envisioned this as an interactive game where the players would have tennis rackets that were rigged. Yeah? In other words, they had a small transmitter, and each time, yeah, they would hit the ball, you would hear a sound, and one light would go off. They had 250 lights, and the idea was to play until it was all dark. Yeah? So each of the gestures of hitting the ball is also an interactive gesture in the sense that it activates the signal. Yeah? And now I'm faced with a stuck film which shows you the progression of the game and the way one light after the other extinguishes until it's completely black. So let's simulate that, do a slow fade out on me. And you can imagine this game. It must have been an incredibly weird and fascinating idea that you would be watching this tennis game until you could not see the players anymore. Yeah? And I think the pling-plong went on in the dark for a bit. And then he did something quite strange, Rauschenberg. He had decided to have an entr'acte film. And this is what you saw in the beginning. He hired people from the streets of New York, gave them $15 and said, can you come on, please, at this particular time? And we will be having you on the playground. And he gave them, I think, small tasks. Yeah, lights, please. Small gestures. I think touch someone's cheek, take your jacket off. Yeah, put it back on. Stroke your hair, and say who you are. Yeah. So when you heard in the beginning, yeah, I'm John Seagull. People were speaking. And he wanted this to be filmed with infrared cameras, which were forbidden at the time in the US because of military reasons. And so he smuggled a system in from Scandinavia and was able to use it. And that's what showed you that blurry footage in the beginning, where you see those ghost-like shapes, yeah, of the people. So I don't know why this film stopped. It is a pity, yeah. I'm really sorry. It looks like it's frozen. So, now what do I do? I need to crash my computer. Let me see. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
We had a bit of a technical challenge here when I set up. We had a little bit of sound interference and turn the sound down. But we should have the images back in a second. So, this idea of Rauschenberg's open score, as well as the other performances that were tested by some of the artists. Deborah Hay was involved, Yvonne Rainer, Lucinda Childs, almost the whole Judson Church generation of experimental artists was participating, and one performance is crazier than the other. Yeah? And unusual experimentations, And I think the key concept was, of course, that over a sustained period of time, artists would work peer-to-peer in relationship with the scientists. And that is a model, I think, that we are still, I think, striving for in terms of peer-to-peer relations and also exchanges that are mutually stimulating. Because it's not really so obvious why scientists or computer scientists or engineers would, come over to us to help us, fix our problems. The role of a technician is a different role if it's meant to be supporting the conditions. But in terms of creating work, I think it's that relationship between partners that interests me, and where also you could say the conceptual vision can drive such a score, yeah, such a composition, such a vision for a piece that very playfully creates a scenario, yeah, a theatrical scenario. Had you seen this before? Some of you know or have read about it, yeah? It was indeed a tennis game, you could say, but obviously conceptually placed inside these evenings of theater engineering pieces. Now, there is another small anecdote which I should tell. Klüver and the Bell engineers got really excited about imagining future computing where you'd have some kind of central control patch, yeah? And what they did was they built a machine for the armory, and this machine they called TEAM, yeah? T-E-E-M, Theater Electronic Environment Modulator, yeah? And that was where all the cables would run together, and that is an early form, I think, of a computing device, yeah? And so when the signals were being sent, yeah, to the TEAM machine, and the lights would go off one after the other, and you'd hear the sound. It's like a trigger or a signal that then causes something to happen. So it is a cybernetic situation with cause and feedback. But the TEAM machine, of course, was meant to be a central controller, and it didn't work the first night. It was a malfunction. So what the engineers did in the back was they unplugged the lights manually. Each time he was hitting, a light would go off magically. Yeah? And then the second night it worked perfectly. Yeah? So they fixed the glitch and they moved forward. Yeah? Which is again very interesting because of the idea of the real or the simulated. Yeah? In terms of how we believe interactivity and what we gain from it in terms of our understanding. So I want to move forward. The works that I studied in the exhibition when I saw it in Austin, some of the works used wonderful suspended screens, and one artist had built this tunnel that people had to go through. There was all this sound streaming through it, but he was interested in the sensorial aspect also of people touching the plastic that he had hung. And so looking at the sensorial side of interactivity, I want to ask you to join me in thinking about how technology in this case is actually disappearing into something else. It's heightening our awareness perhaps of behaviors and sensual and sensorial and visceral experiences. And this is something we need to look at in terms of design, yeah? Whether we are actually designing performances or possibilities for interface behavior that are actually pleasant, yeah? Or producing certain kinds of emotional responses. So this stimulation, for me, led me to have a look at this Brazilian artist, also from the 60s, Elio De Sica. I stumbled across his work in one of the Documenta exhibits in the 90s, but then lost track. There wasn't much information available, and then in Houston we had a major show of his work called Bodies of Color. And he became, again for me, an inspiration, because coming from painting and drawing, he began with sort of two-dimensional paintings where he was playing with color and illusions of movement of the color, and then very quickly moved to reliefs and three-dimensional sculptures, and then found objects, and then assembled objects, and then in his late phase in the 60s, he invented the notion of the parangolés, which is a cape, a cloth that you see on the right-hand side is worn by dancers. He was interested in environments and in color and light, how light would refract it in certain environments, how architecture is important for us in terms of how we experience space and moving through space. And so he built some of these installations. And here are his friends from Rio de Janeiro, the samba dancers, wearing his parangolés. And there are more anecdotes which I may not go into. When the opening of his first show took place in Rio de Janeiro, the museum guards wouldn't let in the black dancers because they thought they didn't belong to the show. Also, museums, of course, traditionally exhibiting objects, not performers. So the idea of merging the two and creating an artwork that only makes sense when it's worn inspired me, And these parangolés have for me associations with other contemporary works. So I'm showing a few examples of the merger of performance, let's say, movement as it's experiencing art and the world. The merger of art and technology and science. This is an Argentinian painter, Fabian Marcaccio. I saw this in Columbus at the art center there, and it's a thing that you can walk into, around and through, and it's made with rapid prototyping techniques. In other words, he had his models and he drew his models, but then some of the synthetic material was printed out, and then he assembled it into this whale-like shape that is becoming almost an architecture. In Holland, we have younger architects like Lars Spuybroek doing this kind of work where the process of creating the design is either analog, because he does use sometimes paper or cloth, and then of course it's transferred into the computer, it becomes digital, and yet again he is interested in the physical experience of space and sound and architecture. And so when he was working on the Sono house, he made a lot of studies of how people walk down staircases, how they go up, how they go around corners. And this is a structure that is now in the Netherlands that again allows you to walk into, play inside, walk through, and it activates sound through the way you cut across the infrared sensors. The process that you see in the design often now is talked about in terms of notions of the folding process, folding and inversions. Ideas that entered architectural discourse in the 1990s through Eisenman and various of the leading architects that became interested also in the digital process. This one is a particularly funky one because it uses a slightly different technology, namely Diller and Scofidio. This was at an exhibition in Switzerland on a lake, created a building out of mist. So they used many small water compression fountains to spray water that would then condense and create this mist. And you would, as a visitor, would given a raincoat, yeah, and a bike, and you could cycle out and then disappear into the building. The building was a temporary structure for, I think, 1 month, and consisted out of fog. Yeah? A fascinating idea, floating on, as you can see on the slide, floating on top of the lake. Yeah? Now, the research side of current performance and dance, of course, looking for maybe anchor points or connection points to the sciences. I notice there's a great interest at the moment in neuroscience and in the way our brain is processing information, or in the way we can learn from understanding neural systems and cognition. And there is Wayne McGregor and his company. There is a project going on right now, I think, in Manchester and Glasgow on kinesthetic empathy, dealing with how you perceive kinetic movement. And now I want to very briefly mention William Forsythe, who in his work with the Frankfurt Ballet and now with his own company has been at the forefront of also in a sense reinterpreting his methodology and putting out some of his work. Yeah? You may have heard that in the late 90s he released a CD with a kind of an introduction to his methods of making movement, and he called it improvisation technologies. And now he's working with the ACAT in Ohio, and they've created this website, and the title of the project is Synchronous Objects. And this slide I found remarkable because it is now, you could say, an image object. But the image object, which looks like a sculpture, is in fact composed of the traces of the movement, yeah, of the dancers that are performing in this piece. The piece that underlies the project is called One Flat Thing Reproduced. And this dance happens on top of those tables. Yeah? So what you are seeing now is the accumulated composite figure of the trace lines of the movements that the dancers are performing on top of the tables, yeah, and you see a lot of curved lines and I suppose a particular kind of vocabulary that Forsythe is interested in. It's having to do with speed and kinetic motion and explorations of particular problems that they are addressing in their work, and he has developed a whole vocabulary of these, yeah, whether it's counterpoint or isometries or cueing, yeah, the way they work with alignment in motion over time, coming together, going apart. This is now in this research project looked at and dealt with in multiple ways. And if you're interested in this research, I need to quote from Nora Suniga-Shaw, the Ohio dance professor who is working with Forsythe, because she tries to explain what is a synchronous object. Yeah? She said it departed from our initial idea of looking at generative motion traces. And then she says, creating a trace of motion, yeah, not for preservation, not for repertory or reconstruction, not as an etymological, archaeological, historical exercise, not to recreate the experience of the piece or its genesis, but to create trace or traces of choreographic principles of what we are starting now to call the choreographic object. So it's an investigation through LABA notation, through video, through motion capture, through various forms of audio and visual annotation, through text, through analysis that the computer can do of motion traces over time, yeah? From looking at the dance from different angles, yeah? They have cameras on top, they have them on the side. In other words, it is looking to analyze the dance in terms of the principles that govern its movement creation and its, I guess you could say, underlying perhaps movement aesthetic or philosophy. And that sort of a combination of expertise, of course, needs a team, yeah, of designers, programmers, movement analysts, LABA notation specialists, and so on. Yeah, so it's a big team. And incidentally, another anecdote, you can tell from this object that the traces are, of course, created through motion capture, that they only used the kinetic data from the upper body because the feet are missing, yeah? The legs, no legs. Yeah? So they, I think, had only the markers for the motion capture of the movement on top of the tables, yeah, as they were moving, and they didn't do the feet, yeah? Which creates this sort of floating. Maybe the arm here went all the way down. I'm not sure whether it would go down on the side. Yeah? But you're creating this sort of floating sculpture, which would be incredibly interesting to exhibit in a gallery. If you could now go to the rapid typing people over in arts and design, yeah, and ask them, here's my file, yeah, could you print this out? And it would be interesting to see. So, I'm way behind everything. So 2 examples I will simply not address performing underwater. This is interesting for sensorial reasons because when Olafur Eliasson had this permanent installation in London at the Turbine Hall, I went there to I was mesmerized by what the people were doing in the space. Yeah? He basically created this artificial sun to bathe the whole space in this water, in this color. Yeah? And people would come and imagine, I suppose, being on some kind of fantasy beach or in some kind of moon landscape. And people would spend hours, yeah, at the Tate Modern. An early slide, well, Ruth Gibson from Igloo is one of the first, I think, in Britain who got their hands on motion capture systems. And I'm always intrigued looking at the older photographs. This is a magnetic system that is worn like a exoskeleton, and it makes me melancholy. Now we use optical motion capture, or we use sensors, and you see how the wires now are attached to the body and how we are working with data. This is actually biology coming into a sort of artistic translation of the movement of molecules. And the artists from Dresden who did this piece use cell movement to generate sound and write algorithms for the sound. So again, a fascinating example of translating the kinetics of a cellular organism, yeah, into an artistic event. Here is a slide from dancers who, in real time, using Isadora, which I will have tonight in the workshop, to create these sort of calligraphic drawings. We're going to skip the robotics, we're going to skip the telematics. Here are some of the aspects, I think, that are key to this notion now of making art, if you are thinking of it as system design. You need to imagine a responsive environment if you are interested in that kind of interaction. And often with the new software that we have, things are happening in real time. In order to have the real-time feedback, you need sensors or camera vision or something that detects what you do. You can work with artificial intelligence programs and then, in a sense, write your patches, yeah? In order to look at how this interactivity works in practice, I chose an example from music, yeah? Because it's very clear to see here. sensor gloves, microphone. She's sampling her voice. She's, in a sense, extending the interface in real time, and she's controlling the parameters, yeah, with her fingers. And in a way, that is a live, interactive setup where I think she's controlling everything. I think she's also controlling the video. In the second example from dance, it's slightly different, but let's study or analyze the interactivity here. Glow is the piece, and we need darkness. The dancer drives the interface, and the interface system, the graphics that are outputted, follow her, yeah? And it follows her very precisely because it's a camera vision interface. The camera hangs on top of the dancer, yeah, up here, and follows her motion, and every now and then goes into activity. And very soon you'll see the key aesthetics of it. It's a software, it's called Calypso, written by Frieder Weiss, the German engineer, that is able to create a certain kind of contouring, spectral contouring around the dancer. And so the dancer is therefore rather flat on the floor in a way, moving her shadow, which is completely digital, yeah? It's a digital spectre, yeah? Shadow dies when there's little movement, and when there is high effort, energy, it spreads out, yeah? Okay, I need to shorten this a little bit. I can show this again, thank you, in the workshop, because here is where the questions need to begin, I think, in terms of our analysis of how aesthetically interesting, or how interesting for our relationship to our audiences is this performed interactivity, this presented interactivity in this kind of feedback system. I had other examples from a British company. And I want to end with a couple of moments of my own work, also admitting that in terms of our interest in narrative and creating larger pieces that have actually a story to tell, interactivity is becoming often a very, very complicated challenge to use. So this was a piece that, in fact, Maria commissioned for a festival in London. We had worked on this piece. It's called Suna no Ona. And I show you what the patches look like today. Yeah? It's 40 years later. That's one possibility of a patch. Max MSP and PD patches look a little bit more abstract. But this is how we are drawing our cables, yeah, between input and output. And my colleague, Michel Donjou, fashion designer, is, of course, interested in also the sensual quality of the garments and making the electronics disappear. Yeah? So hopefully we can sort of continue to develop costumes with unusual materials that allow us to work on the sensual landscape of our work. This are a few moments from the piece. This film is in English called The Woman in the Dunes by a Japanese filmmaker, Teshigahara, from the 60s. And we created the dunes through digital sand that we project, and then things sometimes appear in the sand, and there are also characters that appear on the stage. And I was interested in these sort of relationships that we could create between the characters on stage and the digital characters. The male protagonist who gets captured by the woman in the sand and becomes a hostage is an entomologist who was looking for insects, yeah, in this area of Japan. And so we have insects appear. And then the woman who captures him is wearing these clothes that have sensors integrated. And my idea was that each movement that we see on stage will not only be a movement that will interest us in terms of its visual power and narrative cohesion, but it will affect the sand in the virtual environment. My environment was not extremely intelligent. Some artists, like people coming from computer science like Mark Downey, are able to envision the environment being more and more autonomous, so that when they were working on this piece, he wrote a whole artificial intelligence program where the creatures in his environment would be reacting to the patterns of the dancers and then create their own patterns. And a lot of the work is abstract that Mark Downey and Paul Kaiser are doing. And you see, therefore, it has a geometric dimension. But of course, very fascinating and beautiful to watch. And I end with my current work, which is called Okiyo. And since it's done in collaboration with artists in Japan, they have persuaded us to stage one half of the work in Second Life. And so we are exploring what it is like to imagine an installation that will have no separation between audience and dancers, but the audience moves through, and we are trying to then work with sensorial connection to the virtual worlds, and they are partly photographic and partly Second Life. And I developed this diagram of 5 hanamichi. So the hanamichi are like runways, and our dancers are working on these runways, and then you see the suspended screens. The most interesting aspect for me now is that we want to develop garments that are audiophonic. So the dancers are going to be wearing small speakers on the spine, sound coming out of their shoulder, and we're exploring the dancer as an instrumentalist. This is a scene where the little avatar in Second Life is appearing to one of our dancers. And now, to end with the notion of the social, I don't know now whether my work has moved outside of the theater yet. This artist here, Rafael Lozano Hemmer, has done a lot of public installations outdoors. So this is a kind of an interface with people in the city. And I think he's done work here in England as well, in Leicester and other places. So people become interested in sort of playing with these projected figures or doubles, yeah. And this was a piece that we did in a workshop in East London that took behavior of people in the post office, yeah, when they go to mail their letters, and then project these animation into the window of the building where we were working, so people could actually become engaged. And then to imagine now, to think of the interactive relationship as something artistic and social, it would involve us studying how design and artistic design and design dealing with the sensorial, yeah, can become part of perhaps more daily spaces of leisure activity, of communal activity, and of communal creativity. There is a show right now on at the Victoria and Albert Museum called
The Code.
Code, Digital Sensations. And the keywords that they refer to here are code, interactivity, and network. And obviously you need, in a sense, all three if you're working with the contemporary systems. And my question, of course, is, where does this leave the kind of dance that I came from, that I was trained in? And so I'm trying to think about a dance, a form of performance that no longer relies on older notions of composition and choreography, and I have tried to publish that. But I think notions of composition and choreography for artists will not go away. But if we're working with new media and networks, they will have to be redefined. They'll have to be re-examined completely. Yeah? And this is perhaps where we can now have a little conversation. I hope you can all stay for a few more minutes. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Any questions?
Turn the sound down, please.
Yes, I just did.
I just
Sorry.
noticed something.
Sorry. Rob.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was great to see those examples at the end, which I think were, gave a very kind of clear sense of a strong relationship between the technology and the dancers. And actually it was good to see the Suicided Voice, which was actually recorded here in 2005, yeah, in this very space, in the conference we organised, yeah. Julie and Mark Bukovic from Huddersfield, yeah. Although I think actually that video, it's a slight cheat of an edit, which the beginning of it is from this performance and the other bits are more controlled at Banff. But something I've found is a kind of almost recurring issue with uses of new technology is the sense that it's very easy to be sort of seduced by the technology, and it's very easy to kind of do things for the sake of doing them. Almost like the earlier example with the tennis match, which I think is a very, it's a great idea, a concept, but the fact that actually they're able to do it just by turning off the lights, and almost that sense of, well, why use the technology? And I think those later examples show that really those are really the only way of doing that. But I just wondered, within your own practice, if there's any kinds of techniques that you've been able to develop in terms of devising which enables you to kind of steer things towards using the technology as a tool, but at the same time obviously you want to explore what the potential that the technology has, and how you can kind of navigate that course to end with something meaningful, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's it's a fundamental question. No, I mean, it's a fundamental question of how you make art. I tend to still want to make work that are based on ideas. Something attracts my interest or my passion, or I come across something in dialogue with my partners. I see something that my designer friend does, or that the composer wants me to listen to, and then I begin to think, what would this be, if we made a dance installation? Yeah? Now, then the question of the tools. Yes, because of the nature of the lab and the fact that we are coming together from different backgrounds, it lends itself to exploration of possibilities. And I've taught myself one or two softwares, and I'm comfortable with video and cameras and with some interactive system design. But I wouldn't just make a piece because I have a sensor. Yeah? I wanted the sensor to actually be integral to the vision of this piece, and actually have a continuous, because the data that we were sending from the code were coming all the time. So theoretically, this should have always moved the sand on the screen slightly, almost like a particle physics sort of motion, a continuous motion. And then sometimes other things would appear, and I wanted it to be beautiful and poetic. Now, to develop techniques so that the dancer knows exactly what she's doing, yeah? In a way, she needs to find out whether the accelerometer or the bend sensor or the whatnot sensor, what does it do? Yeah? This takes months and years. And I think it is the learning of a new technique of interface performance, which is very frustrating, because we would have to work every day. We would have to have programmers and the sound artists with us all the time, and we don't often have that luxury. Yeah? And then sensors break down, or the software, the editor is not working anymore, the Bluetooth has a problem. When there are lots of people with cell phones in the audience, you have all kinds of strange things happening. Yeah? So you need to then deal with this sort of system problems, yeah? But I think gradually we're beginning to find for ourselves what we are interested in, and we are at the moment reducing interactivity to 10%. We are actually making work that we want to challenge us, but at the same time, we don't want to be dependent on the technology. Because there are always certain issues with it, and I'm now at a point in my life where I'm getting tired. I'm getting tired of each time many hours of finding the bugs, and then my friends come and say, we got a new software. I said, oh. So, and then we're trying these sensors, yeah, so I'm learning a whole new set. And it would be great if we had microelectronics engineers on our team and we could build our own stuff. That's the idea, yeah? Or if you teach yourself in a way how to build circuitry, that would be helpful. And in a way, custom build your own instruments. And in a way, I think it's true to say that some of us who are working with these tools are like instrument builders. Like when we're doing the audiophonic garments now, we're trying out what sound works on small speakers. I think of small speakers, yeah? Because low frequencies are no good. Yes, you have to have a certain sound that's interesting on the high frequency level, so you explore that. And then to have a dancer that, you know, comes towards you and then suddenly you hear a voice coming out of her shoulder. How can you use this in interesting ways? So it is still grounded in, I think, the idea of the piece and what we're exploring, and then the tools become part of the process. And maybe other artists have better experience than me. I find it really a very cumbersome and difficult process, and at the same time, of course, I have now committed to it. Yeah. I teach digital performance to young students, and in other words, it's not just that they have to be performers, they also now have to be digital artists. They have to write their own software patches, and they need to, in a way, understand, why am I doing this? Yeah? And do I make an installation for the audience to walk into and experience, or do I perform for them? Yeah? And more students, because they no longer have any actor training or any dancer training, they are comfortable making installations. And the audience becomes, has to try out, what is their behavior causing, And I find it really pathetic often, these installations where you are trying to find where the sound is.
Do you think that's an issue results from this tendency to want to layer more and more stuff, as Rob was saying, into the sort of artifact?
And is it, I was just wondering, was the
camera, it's a camera.
A camera just above it?
One camera.
One camera.
And it can't see the dancer, it only sees the motion, the change in the conditions. And
I was wondering if you personally find that more appealing than going to a theatre and seeing a performance which now, after seeing that, seems very basic and simple.
Well, I mean, I chose this example because I think many of us thought that was finally an interesting and successful example of one performer completely integrated with the graphic motion dynamics of the piece, understanding what the software does. She's not driving the sound, she's just working with the camera vision. And it works. Compared to a lot of performances that use multimedia, video projection, and this and this and this, it's more, I think, coherent to me, more successful. But then again, they had a first-class engineer working with them, and they dedicated that solo for this dancer. A lot of the work of the company is not necessarily interactive. There are probably now a few examples of good interactive performance. But by and large, I think we're still in infancy, at the very beginning. And capturing a dancer or using closed circuit or pre-recorded video now, it's kind of becoming predictable, and also the way we project, we need to think about all of these issues. Yeah? Where do you put your images? Because in most theaters, they can only really go behind, right? And it's terrible. Now what they did in Glow, I saw it in Dresden, in the Hellerau Festspielhaus, we were elevated on two sides and looked down on the dancer, which is very beautiful, yeah? and it works really nice because you have also this bird's eye view. Would anyone like to care to answer this gentleman's question about complexity versus simplicity or reduction? I mean, in your own work?
I'm doing a dissertation at the moment, which is about can live performance and multimedia technologies work together, and I think it's well, that's what we're trying to search for.
You're still sorting it out.
Yeah, trying. But I do think, to a certain extent, I think technology and media and performance can bring out certain emotions and evoke certain thoughts that maybe it couldn't if it was too simple. If it was just a performer on the stage, I think sometimes media can enhance the performance and enhance certain feelings that you wouldn't get normally.
Depends on what you mean by enhancing. Can you give an example? You mean in terms of close-up, seeing things that you couldn't see otherwise? Or?
Not so much more if you go to see a theatre show and if they do have a projection of something in the back that could show a history of that character. I'm on about more acting than movement now, but like a history of that character that you wouldn't be able to see in the theatre normally, then you can get more of a connection with people.
Yes, I think that would be a possibility, and it depends on, let's say, if you're thinking theatre or you're thinking dance or thinking music, the way you integrate narrative material or background material, that's certainly a possibility. Often, I think what I find problematic is when there are a lot of media at the same time as the dancer. If you project a lot, it tends to overwhelm the physical performer, and you have to find a really good balance, yeah, to the way you do that, yeah, and that's one of the challenges, I think. Trying to find the film that crashed, so at least you see a little bit more silently of the tennis game as it goes dark. And we can do maybe one more question. Mm-hmm. So to the sound off, please. And here you see a bit more activity from the tennis match. Light a little bit lower. And this unplugging, I think, is actually very charming because it's a manual form of interactivity. And
can I ask a question?
Yes.
Can I ask a question related to that?
Yes.
I mean, I was fascinated to see this, and I think it's always fascinating when we look back at old technology.
Yeah.
Given that we live in a culture that is which is constantly self-reflexive and is constantly retrospectively looking back and in on itself.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a trend, or could there be an emerging trend within the contemporary avant-garde for analog technology? You know, we talk a lot about the extent to which this technology is in its infancy, it needs to develop. To what extent do you think artists might be looking back towards an analog past that they could start to recreate and work with anew?
Well, if I may use a couple of examples, I cannot speak for what other people want to do, because some people who are now living or working entirely in Second Life, obviously they need computing, yeah, and network, and software that creates avatars. But I'm going to a workshop in Switzerland in May, which raises exactly this question, in a sense, re-evaluating analog and analog's relationship to the digital. And then if you look at physical instruments and the work that we're doing right now with the speakers, it helps me to think through some of the software patches by going back to maybe an earlier analog relationship between a sound source and a sound output diffusion instrument, and going back to perhaps the foremothers and forefathers. And one more thing, it's interesting to me that in the museums now, you're beginning to see retrospectives of performance art. So I'm hearing that Marina Abramovic will be exhibited in New York, and the curators have asked her whether all of her early work could be reperformed. and she agreed to it, but she's not doing it herself. Young artists will perform early Marina Abramovic. This is unheard of, actually, that a performance artist would do that. Yeah, and it's interesting that this would give audiences and younger generations an opportunity to actually go back a bit and maybe trace some of the steps. And people like the Vasulkas and other instrument builders who came up with early interface connections. Steiner Vasulka was in the 70s playing violin, manipulating the signal on a TV monitor, like Namjoon Paik, yeah? But she had somehow plugged the violin bow into whatever the cathode ray tube, yeah? And was manipulating on a simple level the white noise on the television. And these early examples, I think, are still wonderful to look at in terms of signal disturbance, early interface ideas, and then also performance of an interface. Because when you are building a transmitter, you still don't have a performance. So now you have to think about your dramaturgy and what it is you want to perform with it. Shall we wrap up here?
Yes,
or?
I think so. Thank you very much, Johannes.
Well, thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you very much. If you're taking part in the workshop, please be here at 6, okay? And wear something comfortable. Bring your laptops along, and I hope you enjoy it.